Welcome to this chapter on Good Manufacturing Practice, EU and USA GMP. In this chapter, we will explain how GMP is structured and how it works in both the European Union, EU, and the United States of America, USA. In particular, we'll focus on how both consider the concept of quality and quality management. In chapters 2 to 4, we have looked at the evolution of both contemporary quality and quality management system thinking. So far, we've talked about quality in general terms and looked at how leading industries and experts view quality, i.e., experts from outside of our industry. Now we should take our own industry forward, and we'll begin this by exploring good manufacturing practice, the very essence and cornerstone of quality thinking in the pharmaceutical industry, and see what it says about quality and quality management systems. Just before we do this, we should examine how GMP works, firstly in the European Union, EU, and then the United States of America, USA. All countries, or sometimes called member states of the European Union, must work to the principles of EU GMP. EU GMP first came into existence in 1992 when the single market was created within the EU. Prior to 1992, countries had their own GMPs and were inspected by their own national regulatory authority. If you supplied multiple countries across Europe, then it was likely that you would be inspected by regulatory authority inspectors from each country to which you sold product. With the creation of the single market of 1992, all national GMPs disappeared and EU GMP was born. From this point onwards, manufacturing sites across the EU would be inspected by their national authority on behalf of all of the EU. Just before 1992, two new GMP directives were issued from the EU. These contain the high-level legal requirements for pharmaceutical manufacturing sites across the EU to work to. One was for human medicinal products, 91/356 EEC, and the other was for veterinary pharmaceutical products, 91/412 EEC. And the requirements of both were more or less the same, but with some subtle differences. Both of these directives are European law and must be incorporated by member states into their own national laws. The Human Medicine Product Directive was subsequently updated in 2003 ahead of the introduction of the Clinical Trials Directive. This changed the wording of the directive to cope with those subtle differences implicit in the making and packing of clinical trial materials as opposed to conventional medicines. The updated directive was 2003/94 EC, and this is the current directive that manufacturing sites must work to when making pharmaceutical products. In the attachments part of this presentation, you will see a PDF copy of both the human and veterinary directives. Choose the directive that is relevant to your manufacturing site and open it up and/or print it off now. Note, there is no need to fully read these directives. We just want to show you how they are structured and roughly what their requirements are. As you look at the directive, you'll see that it contains a series of articles. All of these articles are EU law and must be implemented by pharmaceutical manufacturing sites or manufacturing authorization holders, to be precise. The first two articles are administrative. Article 3 makes it a legal requirement that manufacturing sites are inspected. Article 4 makes it a legal requirement that manufacturing sites work to GMP, and Article 5 makes it a legal requirement that manufacturing sites make their products as described in their marketing authorization. We will now focus on the Human Directive, 2003/94 EC, but you should note that the same principles apply to the Veterinary Directive, 91/412 EEC. Article 6 onwards are the main principles of EU GMP. These can now be seen, from Article 6 to 15. Note that Article 15 on labelling of investigational medicinal products, IMPs, used in clinical trials is only relevant to human medicines and is not in the corresponding veterinary directive. All of the articles in the directive are law, and if a manufacturing site is not following any of these requirements, then they can be taken to court and prosecuted. An example of one of the articles, Article 6 on the quality assurance system, is shown. This is very relevant to this course. It states that the manufacturer shall establish and implement an effective pharmaceutical quality assurance system involving the active participation of the management and personnel of the different departments. This is the very first key principle of GMP. You must have an effective QA system that actively involves everyone. One of the problems of the articles of the GMP directive is that they lack any real detail about how to achieve the requirements of each one. In order to assist us, the EU has produced a guide to GMP that sits next to the GMP directive. There are 9 chapters in the EU Guide to GMP, and you can see how each chapter corresponds to an article of the GMP directive. This is the case for all of the articles except Article 15. As this course is being written, 2013, the titles and contents of a couple of the chapters, chapters 1 and 7, have been updated to give greater scope to the areas that they cover. For completeness, the full list of chapters by their new names as of January 2013 can be seen on the right-hand side. The repercussions of this update will be examined in Unit 2. It is a legal requirement that manufacturing sites comply with all of the articles from the GMP directive. It is also a legal requirement that they work to GMP, GMP Directive Article 4, but the guide to GMP is as it says, guidance. Where there is guidance, then there is scope for flexibility, something that we'll come back to shortly. The 9 chapters of EU GMP are rarely updated. However, unusually, a number have just been reviewed or are due to be updated in 2013-2014. Sitting behind the 9 chapters of GMP are a series of annexes. These provide additional GMP guidance for certain situations and are used when they are relevant. As with the 9 chapters of GMP, these are guidance documents too. They can be seen. It is the annexes which are updated or added to frequently, with the 9 chapters rarely updated. 2 strange anomalies occur within the annexes. Firstly, there is no Annex 18. This was originally entitled GMP for Active Pharmaceutical Ingredients, or API GMP, and was a separate GMP guide for the manufacture of the active chemical in a medicine. This was later moved as it did not apply directly to conventional GMP for finished product manufacture. API GMP was therefore moved to a newly created Part 2 of GMP, with conventional GMP, the 9 chapters that we have been discussing, forming Part 1. The second anomaly concerns what was going to be Annex 20 and 21. In some EU countries, such as Germany for example, they have chosen to go further than expected by the EU and have made all of the chapters and annexes a legal requirement. This is not the case in all member states, such as the UK, where the chapters and annexes are guidance. It was not possible to make the contents of what was going to be Annex 20 and 21 into law, and as such, these will no longer be annexes. They have been moved instead to a newly created Part 3 of GMP in 2012. So in summary, EU GMP now consists of the following. Part 1, the 9 chapters of GMP. Part 2, GMP for active pharmaceutical ingredients. And then there are all of the annexes, which are applicable to both Parts 1 and Part 2 of GMP. Finally, there is Part 3, which includes a number of GMP-related documents such as quality risk management, pharmaceutical quality systems, and guidance on site master files, plus a few other documents. All of these documents can be obtained for free from the European Commission's EUDRELEX website. Google EUDRELEX Volume 4 or go to the website link in your notes. Now, if you understand this, then you're doing very well, by the way. In the UK, the regulatory authority, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, or MHRA, publish a book about every 5 years with relevant GMP-related rules and guidance. Commonly referred to as the Orange Guide, it contains all of the EU GMP chapters and annexes that we have been discussing. It also includes Good Distribution Practice, GDP, and a range of other related EU and UK rules and guidance for pharmaceutical manufacturers and distributors. So, in a nutshell, we have seen how EU GMP is structured and how it works. At this point, it is worth reiterating an important point, and one often missed by organisations and regulatory inspectors alike. It concerns the fact that the chapters of EU GMP are guidelines, and where there are guidelines, then there should be flexibility. This is supported by the final paragraph in the introductory chapter to EU GMP, where it states the following. It is recognised that there are acceptable methods, other than those described in the guide, which are capable of achieving the principles of quality assurance. The guide is not intended to place any restraint on the development of any new concepts or technologies which have been validated and which provide a level of quality assurance at least equivalent to those set out in this guide. In other words, there are alternative ways of achieving the same result, and you are allowed to do things differently to a way prescribed in the guide as long as it is at least equivalent and validated. An example of this is having electronic batch records rather than paper-based records. In the United States, each government department has its own Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR. The Food and Drug Department has Volume 21, with other volumes belonging to different departments such as Transport, Education, and so on. Within Volume 21 are Parts 210 and 211, and these contain USA GMP. Part 210 is more of a preamble, and the actual requirements of USA GMP are found in Part 211. The content of 21 CFR 211 is shown. It is not wholly dissimilar to the contents of EU GMP. The full name of USA GMP is 21 CFR Part 211, Current GMP for Finished Pharmaceuticals, 1976, and is the legal requirement for medicinal or drug manufacturers in the United States. Note that there is no chapter within USA GMP on quality management. It was issued in the 1970s when we were in the quality control era, and in fact there is no mention of quality management or quality assurance in 21 CFR 211. Whereas EU GMP updates have largely been achieved through the addition and update of the EU GMP annexes, USA GMP updates are achieved through a variety of mechanisms. These include the following. The Federal Register is a daily publication of updates to US laws. If there is an update to any part of any of the CFRs, then this is published in the Federal Register along with background information as to the reason for the update. This update is then formally incorporated into the CFR at the next full republication on the first working day of April every year. Updating elements of GMP via the Federal Register thus allows parts of 21 CFR 211 to be updated rather than the whole document in one go. There have been a number, but not a great deal, of amendments to 21 CFR 211 since 1978 via this route, so you need to always refer to the latest version of the CFR to be up to date. FDA guidance documents. These are the nearest equivalent of EU GMP's annexes and give the FDA's opinion on best practice on a certain subject, such as dealing with sterile drug products produced by aseptic processing, general principles of process validation, and quality systems approach to pharmaceutical GMP regulations. These documents are not a legal requirement, but do give the FDA's opinion on the subject. In effect, they do become part of the pile of GMP, as it would be a brave pharmaceutical manufacturing site who chooses to ignore what the FDA view as best practice. Further update mechanisms include the use of FDA Inspection Guides. These provide guidance to FDA inspectors on how to inspect parts of a GMP facility, with guidance documents, for example, on high purity water systems, pharmaceutical quality control laboratories, and sterile drug substance manufacture. Whilst no longer published and not a legal requirement, these guides, whilst stated, do contain some general principles of best practice. Inspection findings and warning letters. Findings at inspections that are not dealt with to the satisfaction of the FDA eventually come into the public domain via the issue of warning letters. This occurs when a site is not deemed to be taking suitable actions to deal with inspection findings. Pharmaceutical manufacturing sites that supply the USA usually employ someone to keep track on what is being observed by inspectors so that their own sites do not encounter similar findings. As you will have worked out by now, USA GMP expectations are not as easy to find and are certainly not published in a single book, as is in the case of the EU. So in summary, we have discovered how both EU and USA GMP are structured and updated. Whilst different, it is worth remembering that the aim of both GMPs is the same: to protect the patient. We have seen how the issue of updates are tackled. In EU GMP, this is mainly via the annexes. Especially important to us during this quality management system course will be the actual contents of GMP Part 3 guidelines on quality risk management and quality management respectively. In USA GMP, we see a more disparate approach and a multitude of documents again important to us. And this course will be one of the GMP guidance documents concerned with quality systems. Both of these update documents will be examined in more detail during Unit 2 as we think about the design of a pharmaceutical quality management system. For further information on both aspects of EU GMP and USA GMP, follow the links given in the chapter and visit the respective UDRELEX and FDA's websites. This concludes this chapter, where we've introduced the structure and legal status of GMP. In the next chapter, we will look at what GMP actually states with regard to quality management systems.